Hi, well, you're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about love and sex with Ashley
and Heather. And today we're talking about good sex, bad sex. And we just want to throw this out there as a reminder that depending on where you're at in your recovery and healing, that if there's something that we talk about that seems triggering to you, or even just maybe you're not far enough in your healing that you could listen to an episode like this, then just skip it and come back to it when you're ready. But like always, we just want to jump right into the questions that we've received. And so the first question is, can my husband rape me? And this is really an interesting question, and it comes up probably more than you would think that it would come up. And sometimes it's not even happening the way that we envision a lot of situations that involved sexual assault or rape. And I remember one time we ended up getting an email from a woman who kind of told this story. Her and her husband were both in group, and so they were connected with Pure Desire. And she had sent us this email saying that she had sustained some kind of an injury or something. And so one evening she took something like a muscle relaxant, and she was in the bath, and then she needed her husband's help to get out of the bath and get into bed. And then in the morning, which she remembers none of this, but in the morning, he told her that he had sex with her when she wasn't even really conscious. And even the way she described it, it was like he was delighted in the way that he took advantage of her. And her question was, is this okay? Is this rape if I didn't consent and if I wasn't even conscious? And I think that she was more bothered by his response to it, of really feeling like, well, you're my wife, and so I should be able to have sex with you when I want to have sex with you. And so this is one of those situations where, I mean, absolutely no, and no, even though it's your spouse, they don't have a right to take advantage of your body without your knowledge and without your consent. And this is really such a big issue that every single state in the United States has rape laws that apply to even husband and wife. And so this is one of those things, again, that you don't think that it would really happen as much as it does, but there are very clear lines about we have a responsibility and we get to control our body. And even if that's controlling it in ways from our husband's use of our body, we have a right to say, no, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another situation that, I mean, there's a variety of situations, and there's, I guess what people would think of like that forceful holding you down. Like there's that. And then there's stuff like you talked about, whether it's a muscle relaxer or she drank too much and, doesn't remember part of the night, like there's all kinds of different situations. And another situation I've heard from spouses that we've worked with is like the coercion of, okay, well, can we have sex tonight? No, I really don't feel safe because of the betrayal trauma, or I'm not in the mood, or I'm not feeling okay because I just had a baby or a hysterectomy, or, something going on. And then there's this emotional, verbal, sometimes physical abuse to the spouse. And then she just gives in because she doesn't want to have to deal with it. Right. And that is so traumatizing to a spouse's brain and body, because then we end up storing trauma in our bodies. And so sometimes when we would have the women at the conferences that say, well, when I have sex, it hurts. I've talked to an OBGYN and a pelvic floor therapist that will say they see that often connected with women who have had trauma surrounding sex, because now their whole body is storing the trauma, or they're tensing up and they don't even realize that's what's happening. And so it's just triggered, or they can't relax whenever sex does happen because of this pattern. And so one of the things that we can do in group or in a group setting or counseling is to try to unpack that and really help women understand, and men too, but women understand that when we have physical, sex with our spouse, that emotionally we should be in the right place too. Otherwise, our brain is so confused and our body is so confused. And then we're just kind of setting us up for a bad path going forward.
Right. And again, it's one of those things that depending on where a person is at in their healing, that even having the right language and having boundaries around that so that you recognize that when it is a situation where maybe you start to feel like you're being coerced, then you can say, you know what, you're validating or you're violating my boundaries around this. And we've agreed that this is what sex is going to look like for us going forward. And I don't think that you're honoring my, what's going to make me feel safe.
Yeah. And the hard part, I remember somebody, and it was one of the experts that in our field of what we do, but they said, you don't have sex with people you don't trust,
right.
And not meaning that in like a loose way of like, okay, you can have sex with all the people you trust, but like, if you don't trust your spouse, you shouldn't be having sex, like, because it just screws us up. And so that kind of leads into our next question of, is it okay for me to say no to my husband? And that is also a complex situation, because if you were raised in a church that says you always submit to your spouse, you always say yes. I remember hearing from a pastor's wife, oh, I just always say yes to sex no matter what, and that keeps our marriage good. So I'm like, okay, store that little nugget of wisdom from this spiritual mentor, and it was not good, but what it does is it sets you up to not be able to listen to your body, not be able to have sex be an overflow of what's happening in the marriage,
right,
versus something that you do to keep the marriage together. And so that can take time for a person who has that mentality that they're never supposed to say no to sex. It can take them time to undo that and to realize that it's okay to say no, and it's okay to say we shouldn't be doing this if we're not emotionally intimate. If we're not emotionally connected, we shouldn't be physically and sexually connected. We need to work on this first. And it's a good indicator that maybe there's some unhealth if you're having sex but not feeling emotionally connected, that there's something that there needs to be worked on.
Right. And I think that sometimes we come across this idea that, or we hear, I know I have heard this, that it's just sex. I could put a bag over anybody's head and have sex with her body. And you know what? I think that that's wrong. I think that that is poor messaging, because really, when it comes to all the work that we do, that people who come to us, men and women, and they want to fix their marriage and they want to be healthy, that they discover that the way that we behave sexually in our marriage is really a reflection of the health in our marriage. And I really think that that is what sex should be about, the way that God designed sex between a husband and a wife.
Yeah. And you're saying, the way our sex life looks is a reflection of our marriage, but not the number and not the quantity, because you can check the box and it can be totally detached and you could be fantasizing about something else. But it reminds me of, remember the women's conference we did where we had that lady from the college who was not a Christian, didn't have Christian faith, She was really kind of just coming to check us out to see what Christians said about sex, almost in like wanting to pick it apart a little bit. And then she interviewed us afterward. And we didn't know she was in the audience. And then when we had those interviews with her, and I remember in my interview with her, she was saying, I haven't heard Christians talk about sex the way you guys did.
Yes.
And she said, why? She goes, the way that you put the emphasis on how you thought that the marital bed really was could be a reflection of the health in your marriage. And I said, yeah, because people can be roommates and they can check the box for sex, but it doesn't mean that they're connected. It really is that pausing to say, how am I really feeling in this moment? Am I feeling disgust? Am I feeling like I'm being raped? Am I feeling like I'm being used? Am I feeling shame? Am I feeling fear? Am I feeling like just disengagement, like apathy? If you're feeling any of those things when you're having sex with your spouse, there's probably an indicator that there's something else, especially with the female brain and how it works. And if we're triggered or when we're in conflict, then it's harder to be able to relax and have sex and have orgasm. And so just using that as an opportunity to say there might not be something right here if emotionally I'm not feeling close enough for this to be exciting. Like we get to have this time together tonight and bond physically because we love each other. We're feeling connected, and this is just the overflow of that.
Right. And I think that that's a message that we don't hear enough in the church, especially, is that, sex between husband and wife should be mutually satisfying, and a lot of people, I think, believe the lie that sex is just for men, and it's really not. Women need sex as much as men need sex. It just is motivated by different reasons.
Well, that's a good lead into our next question, because I can think of the time when John and I were like going through this after betrayal, and really we'll hear spouses say, I just want things to go back the way they were before discovery and betrayal. And it's like, I remember my pastor going, and he's a great pastor, no, you don't want it to go back the way it was. And I was like, yes, I do. You don't know me, And then as I started getting healthy, I was, we started recovering and healing. I'm like, no, I don't, because we didn't really have true intimacy, because you have to be taught this, and you have to have it modeled well, and you have to have people you can talk to about it, and you have to have good teaching on it. So we really had to deconstruct what we understood about sex and deconstruct what we understood about God and sex, and then rebuild from ground up and rebuild this new healthy intimacy that was totally new and totally different. It was, I've said this before, John and I both had a wild past. So when we got married, it was like, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be. We're married to one person. We're having monogamous, mutually satisfying Christian sex. So it's good, right? And it's not. Like, there's so much more depth that can come from being really physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally connected. And then, having sex. And so my next question, I feel disconnected when we don't have sex, but when I have sex with my husband, I feel used. What can I do to change this pattern? And I see a couple of things here, but just like reflecting back on my experience, I remember thinking, well, bad wives say no to their husband and bad wives do this. And so I had to really work through that in my mind, or the lie that if I take sex off the table because I'm feeling used, or during the day, he's not really showing me that he values me, and then at night we want to have sex, I need to be okay that it's not my responsibility if I stop having sex that he may go act out with porn or affairs. Like, that is not my responsibility. My responsibility is making sure that I feel safe and that I feel connected with my husband. And that's a whole other thing he's going to have to work on with his group, with his counselor, with God. And so that was one fear I had to let go of if we stop having sex, will it just cause him to go act out more? The other one is, will we be disconnected if we don't have sex? And we used to say that, like, oh, I feel disconnected. And it's not always that you're not having sex. There might be other things. You might not have shared what's been happening during the week. You might not have shared where you're at in your recovery or your healing. Maybe you haven't had enough time away from the kids just to connect emotionally. And so there's other ways